July is coming, and right now, in the window between late spring and peak summer heat, there is a specific set of decisions your perennial garden either gets right or pays for through the entire season. Miss this window and you spend July and August watching plants decline from problems that were completely preventable in June. Execute every task on this list, and your perennial garden carries itself through the hottest months of the American summer, producing more bloom, better structure, and stronger root systems than it had in spring. Most gardening content tells you to water consistently and add some fertilizer, and calls that a summer prep plan. That is roughly 10% of what your perennial garden actually needs right now. Today, I am giving you the other 90%. The 6 tasks that determine whether your garden thrives through July and August or develops disease, stops blooming, and declines at the exact moment summer is supposed to be peak season. Drop your USDA hardiness zone or your US state in the comments right now. Every task on this list executes differently depending on where you are in the country and how far along your perennials are at this moment. I read every single one. Let's go. This is PlantEdge. Every video on this channel gives you the science your garden center tag leaves out, the biology, the chemistry, the zone-specific timing that turns a struggling perennial bed into a garden that runs itself. Subscribe now so you do not miss what comes next. Task 1. Deadhead everything that has finished its first bloom, but not the way most gardeners do it. Deadheading is the most talked about pre-summer perennial task and the most consistently misunderstood one. Most gardeners pinch off the spent flower head and move on. That removes the visual problem but leaves the seed stem fully intact. And that stem is still pulling the plant's energy toward seed production rather than toward the new lateral buds already forming below it. The correct deadheading technique is to follow the spent flower stem all the way down to the first set of healthy lateral buds or leaves below it and cut there. Not at the spent flower head. At the next active growing point below the finished bloom. That single cut redirects the plant's energy immediately into those lateral buds and accelerates the second flush of bloom that most gardeners never see because they deadheaded at the wrong point. Coneflowers cut to the next lateral bud. Catmint shear the entire plant back by half. It looks severe for 10 days and returns with a second flush denser than the first. Black-eyed Susan deadhead to the next developing stem. Daylilies remove individual spent blooms daily, then cut the entire scape to the base once every bud on it is opened and finished. Garden phlox cut entire spent flower heads back to the next set of leaves to eliminate the self-seeding that degrades your named cultivar into inferior seedlings within 2 to 3 seasons. The perennials you should not deadhead before July. Leave coneflower seed heads standing if you want to support goldfinches through fall and winter. Leave sedum flower heads entirely. They are just beginning to develop and will carry architectural interest through fall and winter with zero maintenance. Leave ornamental grasses untouched. They are building the seed plumes that define their entire visual contribution to your late-season garden. Tell me in the comments which perennial in your garden gives you the strongest second flush after you cut it back. Drop your zone and the plant name. I read every single one. Task 2. Cut back the plants that are finished for the season and use that cut to trigger rebloom in plants you did not know were capable of it. Some perennials do not rebloom. They have 1 flush of flowers per season, and that is the complete end of their contribution until next year. Most gardeners leave these plants standing through summer growing progressively more ragged. That is a mistake that costs them visual real estate in the border, invites fungal disease into the spent foliage, and wastes the soil and water resources that plant is still consuming. Cut back single flush perennials, oriental poppies, bleeding heart, bearded iris, all the way to the basal foliage the moment their bloom cycle has completely finished. Remove the spent stems entirely at the base. What remains is a clean, low mound of foliage that holds its position in the border without becoming the liability that a standing dead stem creates through July and August. Here is what most gardening content never tells you about cutting back perennials before July. Several plants that most gardeners treat as single flush performers actually produce a second bloom when cut back hard immediately after the first flush ends. Salvia nemorosa. Cut the entire spent spike mass back by 2/3 the moment bloom finishes. A complete second flush arrives within 4 to 6 weeks. Delphinium. Cut the spent spike back to the basal foliage after the first bloom cycle, and a second set of spikes emerges by late summer. Catmint is one of the most dependable second flush performers in American perennial gardening when it is cut back immediately rather than left to set seed. The rule is simple. Cut back the moment bloom ends. Do not wait until the plant looks bad. Cut the moment the last flower on the last stem has finished and the plant's energy moves directly into new growth rather than into seed. If you are not subscribed yet, do it now. PlantEdge releases zone-specific perennial and botanical science every single week that most gardening content never gets close to covering. 2 seconds. Hit the button. Task 3. Divide every overcrowded perennial clump before the heat arrives. Overcrowded perennials stop blooming. That is not a general observation. That is a biological certainty rooted in how perennial root systems allocate energy. When a clump grows beyond its productive root density, the center dies out. The plant redirects all available energy to the outer ring of growth and bloom production drops sharply, sometimes to zero in the crown. By the time most gardeners notice their coneflowers or daylilies are producing fewer blooms than they did 3 seasons ago, the clump has been critically overcrowded for 2 full years already. June is one of the 2 best division windows in the American gardening calendar, the other being early fall. The soil is warm enough to promote rapid root regeneration after division. The worst heat has not yet arrived to stress a freshly divided root system, and the divided plant has the entire remainder of the growing season to establish itself before the ground freezes. Here is the division technique most gardening content skips entirely. Do not divide a perennial without watering it deeply the day before. A fully hydrated plant handles division stress dramatically better than a dry one. The root cells are turgid and far less prone to desiccation during the hours between lifting and replanting. Dig the entire clump. Lift it cleanly from the soil. Look at it. A healthy dividable perennial clump has multiple distinct crowns, the point where stems emerge from the root mass. Each division requires at minimum 1 healthy crown with active root mass still attached. A crown with no roots will not survive. A root mass with no crown will not regenerate. Crown plus root mass. That is your minimum viable division. Replant immediately. Do not allow divisions to sit in sun or wind. Water deeply right after replanting. Mulch the replanted divisions to conserve moisture and buffer soil temperature during establishment. Expect some wilting in the first 3 to 5 days. This is normal. Active new growth within 2 to 3 weeks confirms a successful division. Perennials that require division every 3 to 4 years in most American zones: daylilies, hostas, coneflowers, black-eyed Susan, bee balm, asters, catmint. Each division from an established clump is a free plant at current nursery prices of $12 to $20 per unit. A single morning of dividing a mature perennial garden produces $150 to $300 worth of plants. That is not a rough estimate. That is the arithmetic of perennial gardening executed correctly. Hit the like button right now. Every like signals to YouTube that this information is worth showing to the American gardener who is about to spend money at a nursery on divisions of plants already growing in overcrowded clumps in their own garden. 1 tap. Task 4. Fertilize for summer bloom production, not for spring vegetative growth. The fertilizer error that costs American perennial gardeners more bloom than any other mistake. Applying a high nitrogen balanced fertilizer in late May or early June, the same formulation used to push spring growth, at exactly the moment the plant's biological priority has shifted from building foliage to producing flowers. High nitrogen in June does to perennials precisely what it does to tomatoes. It drives lush, dark green vegetative growth at the direct expense of flower production. The plant looks vigorous. It is not blooming. The nitrogen is biochemically outcompeting the flowering signal at the cellular level. Switch to a low nitrogen, high phosphorus formulation for perennials from June through mid-July. Phosphorus is the macronutrient that drives root development and flower production, the two biological processes your perennial garden is prioritizing right now. Look for a label where the middle number, phosphorus, is equal to or greater than the first number, nitrogen. Apply once in early June at the labeled rate. Do not exceed it. Higher concentration does not produce more bloom. Correct chemistry at the right time produces more bloom. The alternative used by the Chicago Botanic Garden across their perennial display collections, and one that requires zero purchased fertilizer. A 3-inch layer of finished compost worked lightly into the soil surface around every perennial clump in late spring replaces supplemental fertilizer entirely through the summer months. Compost releases nutrition slowly through microbial activity, feeds soil biology rather than bypassing it, and never creates the nitrogen spike that suppresses flowering. One compost application in May or June. That is the complete fertilizer program. Task 5. Establish your deep watering protocol before July arrives, not after the damage appears. Shallow, frequent watering is the single most damaging irrigation practice in American perennial gardening. It feels like responsible care. You are watering every day, but water applied in small quantities daily only penetrates the top 1 to 2 inches of soil, which is precisely where established perennial roots are not. Perennial root systems in mature plants extend 6 to 18 inches below the soil surface depending on species. Shallow watering keeps roots concentrated near the surface where they are most exposed to heat stress, drought, and the soil temperature fluctuations that occur daily in July and August. Deep, infrequent watering drives roots downward into cooler, more stable soil layers where moisture persists through dry periods between rainfall events. The difference in heat tolerance and drought resilience between a perennial with shallow surface roots and one with a deep established root system is not a minor variation. It is the difference between a plant that looks strong through August and one that begins to decline by the 3rd week of July. Before July arrives, establish a deep watering routine. 1 inch of water per week delivered in 2 sessions, not 7. Apply water slowly enough that it penetrates rather than runs off the soil surface. A simple tuna can placed under your sprinkler head measures delivery precisely. When the can holds 1 inch of water, that session is done. Water in early morning exclusively. Water applied to perennial foliage that dries off during midday creates no fungal risk. Water sitting on foliage through the night creates the warm, humid surface conditions that powdery mildew, black spot, and botrytis require to establish. Morning. Always. Mulch every perennial bed before the first July heat arrives. 4 inches of shredded bark or straw mulch reduces soil surface evaporation by up to 70%. That reduction means your twice-weekly deep watering goes significantly further, and the soil stays consistently moist between events rather than cycling between saturated and critically dry. Mulch is not an aesthetic finishing touch on a perennial bed. It is a water management system that makes every other task on this list more effective. Task 6. Scout for pests and disease now before the heat of July accelerates both. The 2-week window before July is the most critical pest and disease scouting period in the American perennial gardening calendar. Not because July introduces new pest species, because the heat of July accelerates the reproduction cycle and spread rate of every pest and pathogen already present in your garden at this moment. Aphid populations double every 4 to 5 days under warm conditions. A minor aphid colony on the undersides of your catmint or phlox leaves in June becomes a full-scale infestation by mid-July that requires significant intervention to reverse. That same colony, identified now, requires one application of diluted hydrogen peroxide solution or a direct blast from the hose to eliminate entirely. Powdery mildew on bee balm and garden phlox presents as faint gray-white patches on the lower leaves in early June. Caught at that stage, remove the affected leaves and apply a preventative treatment. Left until July, the pathogen covers the entire plant and cannot be eradicated, only managed. Examine every perennial bed this week with intention. Turn leaves over and inspect the undersides. Aphids, spider mite webbing, and fungal spore colonies all establish on leaf undersides before any upper surface symptoms appear. Check stem bases at soil level for slug activity. Slugs feed through the night and move back into the soil by morning, leaving ragged, irregular holes in leaves with no visible pest during daytime inspection. The correct preventative spray for both fungal pressure and soft-bodied pest pressure before July arrives is 1 teaspoon of 3% hydrogen peroxide per cup of water, applied to all leaf surfaces in early morning, once per week. The oxidizing reaction kills fungal spores on contact and makes leaf surfaces chemically hostile to soft-bodied insects without leaving any residue in your soil or disrupting soil biology in any measurable way. That is your preventative protocol from now through August. Here is your complete pre-July perennial checklist in one place. Deadhead every finished bloom correctly, cut to the next lateral bud, not the flower head. Cut back single flush perennials immediately after bloom ends. Shear reblooming perennials like catmint and salvia nemorosa by half right now. Divide every clump that has dropped in bloom production. Switch to low nitrogen, high phosphorus fertilizer or apply 3 inches of finished compost. Establish deep, infrequent watering twice per week before July heat arrives. Mulch every bed to 4 inches before the first July heat wave. Scout every plant for pest and disease pressure this week while each problem is still manageable. 6 tasks. 1 pre-July window. The difference between a perennial garden that performs spectacularly through August and one that declines by mid-July is determined almost entirely by what you do or do not execute in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Subscribe now if you have not already. Hit the notification bell and leave 2 things in the comments before you go. What USDA zone or US state are you gardening in? And which of these 6 tasks are you doing this weekend? I read every single comment. Your answers drive the next video directly. July is coming. Your perennial garden is ready if you